Well, let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals, and let's start with Trey Hendrickson. There's been some reports, some stuff circulating around, different publications and certainly the internet as well. Boomer Esiason, most recently yesterday, went on the Up and Adams show with Kay Adams and basically said, yep, I think the Cincinnati Bengals should move off of Trey Hendrickson. And then Dianna Russini of The Athletic a couple of days ago wrote that, the 49ers potentially are interested in Trey Hendrickson, and there could be a trade when it relates to that. Basically, my takeaway is this. The Bengals sit here at 2-4 right now. They've got 3 games before the bye. And the first one, obviously, is Thursday night at home in a couple of days. That's going to be very, very exciting. And we'll spend time talking about that matchup over the course of the next 2 days. And then you get the Jets and the Bears after that. You have to go at least 2-1 going into the bye, right? Trade deadline is November 4th, and that kind of is, I believe the bye is on the 8th. Don't quote me on that, but it's right around the trade deadline. So you consider and evaluate your team going into that bye, going into the trade deadline before potentially making a move. And, I think you have to go 2-1 to have a chance here to sit here and say, we're in a spot where we could potentially be hanging around late in the year for a potential Joe Burrow return. You can't go 1-2 or 0-3 over the course of these next 3 weeks. You've lost 4 games in a row as it is. Right? There's a lot of people out there that think this game Thursday night is a must-win. Not going to say that exactly, but I do believe you have to go 2-1 over the course of these next couple of weeks. Now, the Niners certainly should be interested in Trey Hendrickson, and they're a very aggressive organization there. Jed York, their owner, John Lynch, their GM, and I think they understand that they have a really solid football team. They just lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who might be the best team in the NFL, but they have injuries all over the place, right? The injury with Bosa. Now they just lose Fred Warner, their linebacker. Oh, my goodness. He's out. Still one of the best linebackers in professional football, and it'll be interesting to see how aggressive they are. Obviously, Purdy's banged up. They've gone with Mac Jones. He's played well. But if this is a Niners team and an organization who, by the way, is very aggressive, as I just pointed out, I think they still probably believe that they can make a run at this thing, even with losing Bosa and Warner. And, that really is probably the first team that comes to mind when you think about a Trey Hendrickson deal. Obviously, the Bengals did not give him a long-term deal. They gave him the pay raise, $30 million a year. And, I think the whole goal is let's run this thing back one more time with Higgins and Chase and Burrow and see what we can do. Burrow obviously gets hurt right away, and that kind of puts a damper on that plan. But there's no way that Trey Hendrickson is going to be a Cincinnati Bengal next year. I would be flat out shocked if that was the case. We all remember the turmoil that we sat here and discussed it at length for weeks and months on end about, are they going to pay Trey Hendrickson? Oh, it sounds like they're not going to pay Trey Hendrickson. Oh, Trey Hendrickson's pretty ticked off. Oh, he requested a trade. Oh, he's not showing up to these workouts. It was a whole, drama drama-filled offseason for Trey Hendrickson, and I think some people might forget that a little bit, considering, Joe Burrow gets hurt, and then you have these struggles, you're 2-4, but let's not forget what happened here this offseason. It was a mess with Trey Hendrickson, and there's just simply no way, in my mind, that he is back with Cincinnati next year, so the question becomes, are you going to try to get some more from Trey Hendrickson than what you would get if ultimately you don't move him? There's going to be a contender that has interest in Trey Hendrickson. We'll keep an eye on the back situation. Ian Rappaport reported yesterday that he avoided any serious injury, and there's still hope that he could potentially suit up on Thursday against Pittsburgh. Obviously, that would be huge for Cincinnati. But the whole thing, last year or during the offseason when he was requesting a trade was, we view him at such a higher level than we view these draft picks. Well, now that becomes a little bit different here. If you go 1-2 or 0-3 and your season's over going into the bye, well, then you need to stockpile your draft picks a little bit. Mind you already lost one with the Joe Flacco trade, and you've got holes all over this team. And, on the offensive line, certainly, and all across the defense, you can get better at all those spots. Now, some people might say, well, we're just going to pick the wrong guys. Fair, but there's no real, other option. You need to load up on those draft picks, and you eventually have to hit in one of these drafts. This is a Bengals organization that in years past has shown the ability to draft well, but over the course of the past few years have drafted very, very poorly. And you see it in the NFL all the time. You have 2 good drafts in a row or even 1 great draft, boom, you're right back in a good spot with a bunch of young talent and guys that you aren't paying a ton of money. Seattle, right, is a prime example. What they've done over the course of the past 2 years defensively in the draft, they're excellent. And then they hit in free agency with the quarterback and Sam Darnold, and they look very much like a playoff team right now. The Rams, same division there in the NFC West, did it for years, with Les Snead and Sean McVay and those guys calling the shots. That defense, remember they win the Super Bowl, and then next year they're just bad, and then boom, they're right back to being really good because they hit on all those picks on the defensive side of the ball and rework the offensive line. And, they're a perennial team now in the National Football League. Eventually, the Bengals are going to have to do that again, right? No matter what they do in free agency or any trades that they made, that's only going to take you so far. In this league, you have to draft well, and you have to get guys that can contribute to your football team on rookie deals when you're not paying them a ton of money. And that's how, that's a recipe for success for you in the National Football League. So the Bengals, if they're eliminated, they're not going to technically be eliminated from the postseason here. But again, if they're 1-2 or 0-3, you can stick a fork in them because they aren't going to make the playoffs. Then you need to look at stockpiling some draft picks and moving off Trey Hendrickson. Now Reed brought up a good point there on off the bench. He says you should do it right now because he thinks you could potentially get a second-round pick if you do it now. I just don't think you can punt on the season here in this situation right after you made a move for Joe Flacco. Right, if you had rolled Jake Browning out there again in the Green Bay game and it looked awful again, then I would have a different viewpoint. But you just kind of reshaped your organization right here. You went and you made a move with a quarterback. You can't do that and then immediately trade Trey Hendrickson. That wouldn't make any type of sense. Again, if you kept Browning, then I'd be fine to deal him right now. But considering you just made a move for a quarterback, you just played, in my opinion, still one of the best teams in the National Football League. We'll get to them in my power rankings. The Packers, they check a lot of boxes for you. They're real threats. The loss against Cleveland, certainly a concern, and the tie against Dallas, certainly a concern. It's just the nature of this league, though. It happens, right? You lose some games you shouldn't lose, right? That's just kind of the NFL. But the Packers are a really, really good team, right? And the fact that the Bengals lost this game to the Packers, I predicted before the year that they would lose this game even with Joe Burrow. So I don't think you should, full-blown panic after losing this game right after you trade it for a quarterback, right? It wouldn't make sense to me to move him at this point. Does the value go down as you get closer to the deadline? Maybe, right? I already think it's a bit of a stretch that you could even get a second-round pick for Hendrickson now. I think third or fourth round is, more likely for Trey Hendrickson. But we'll see. I think it's definitely something the Cincinnati Bengals should be open to. Typically, we would sit here and say, well, the Bengals don't make in-season trades, and there's absolutely no way that they would move Trey Hendrickson. Well, they've made two in the past 2 years here, obviously with Flacco here last week, and then, of course, Khalil Herbert last year at the deadline, bringing him in at that running back spot. So who knows? I think if something is there and they have an opportunity to add a draft pick or two or maybe a young player, they will do that. And a team like San Francisco is going to be aggressive, right? A team like Howie Roseman in Philadelphia, would that surprise you at all if he made a move to try to get Trey Hendrickson? Absolutely not. And if things look ugly here against Pittsburgh, maybe you take some calls now. But I think going into the bye week, you're really going to have to reevaluate a lot of things. And I hate to say this personally. I know some people out there will love that I'm saying this. But if you get blown out over the course of these next 3 weeks again, right? And that would include a loss to the winless New York Jets. You might be thinking about making a trade, but also making some changes on your coaching staff as well. I personally hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it will happen, considering what you saw in the second half against Green Bay and what you've seen from a defensive standpoint throughout the course of the year. Look, I know there's some people out there that are still freaking out about the defense and say the defense stinks. I hear you. I get that. But let's be very clear. If Joe Burrow was the quarterback of this team right now, this defense would be good enough. What they've been able to do. If Joe Burrow's out there playing at the level in which he played last year, this defense would be good enough. So I understand they couldn't get off the field in the second half against Green Bay. I understand they've given up a lot of points, but they have significantly improved from last year's group. And to me, that's very, very obvious. And to you as a fan, that should be quite obvious there as well. But to kind of put a bow on that, Boomer, Dianna Russini talking about potentially moving Trey Hendrickson, I think it's something that should be considered. Last year I was like, absolutely not, because you had Joe Burrow playing quarterback. But if you go into this bye here with 2 losses, all right, over the course of these next 3 games, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New York Jets, and the Chicago Bears, 2 of those games have to be won. Don't care which 2 they are, but if you don't win 2 of those games, your season is over, and that bye ends up timing out pretty much right around the trade deadline. Then I'm looking to move Trey Hendrickson. And at that point, you're kind of just moving him for whatever you can get. And it might not be much. It might not be much, but you have to understand that the mindset here going into the year was that this was Trey Hendrickson's last year anyway, right? So if you're in a spot where you're basically eliminated from the postseason, it doesn't really make that much of a difference in my mind. And if you can get even a late round pick, you make the move and you move on. But obviously the season hasn't worked out the way Zach Taylor and many people around the organization and certainly the fan base was hoping coming into this 2025 campaign.